God, I hate writing intros. Actually, do you guys even care? No? Wonderful, I don't either. 80 skills, technically 79, but the Rancor Slash is on 2 weapons, so there's 80. Is that okay with you? Is that cool? Number 80, Blindfold of Happiness. You ever wonder what it would be like if gestures needed FP to cast? Of course you haven't, you deflated air mattress. That's called being normal. You probably didn't hope for a DLC-ified rehash of boring shit we already had in the base game either, but we don't choose our timeline, we just live in it. Placing it on a torch people will only use for style points is already reason enough to sweep it under the rug, but having it perform exactly like Unseen Form with just a shorter duration is going to summon a wave of misanthropes to the front door of your office demanding why it's there. And I'm the motherfucker in the front row with the sign reading, "Why did it take so long to fix the Godfrey icon?" It has no helpful attributes aside from its admittedly cool visual style, and that's not something you usually come to me for, so if blindness really is bliss, then I hope you don't mind none of us seeing a damn thing in this torch. Number 79, Dragonform Flame. So another fire breather. Wow, I actually can't think of anything to say here. It deals fire damage. And it resets Frostbite. I'm serious, I've never been more uninterested by any single action I've seen the character do in this game. It's Fire Breather, that's it. Guys, there's no way I'm writing a whole paragraph about this, Jesus fuck. I can find more interesting things to say about a potato chip. I've never had a weapon skill actually dig into my brain and prevent my neurons from firing. Fuck melatonin, just a few pass-throughs of this baby and it'll be tomorrow morning before you know what happened, shit. Number 78, Moore's Charge. I sure hope you're using this for poise damage, because that's all it's giving you. 30, to be exact. If anyone cares. It's the rejection spell with a longer fuse and 28 more pounds. I wouldn't complain nearly as much if there were actually a way to bypass the left-hand priority of the weapon skill the game seems to think so fondly of, which I've decided to call leftist propaganda because I think I'm very funny. But I guess the large AoE can come in handy for environmental kills if I absolutely force it to. Then again, the bullet radius is just barely fatter than an uncharged rejection cast and with almost twice the FP cost. Say what you will about shield crash, at least that shit does damage. This is the 3rd entry on the list so far, and I still haven't seen a single ash or skill that's actually completely unique to the DLC. Number 77, Roaring Bash. Oh my fucking god. Okay, 4. We are now 4 entries into the video, and we are still tits deep in the graveyard of recycled asset. When does this stop? I'm getting depressed. You can't just take the shield bash animation and attach a generic physical shockwave bullet to it that doesn't even get boosted by the roar medallion. I mean, it's not like it would have mattered that much. I've seen fly swatters do more damage, but I feel like vanilla talismans and their incompatibility with DLC items is a problem we keep running into. The stagger value on the attack itself is only a 3, which doesn't even count as an actual knockback as seen on Rejection and Moore's Charge. The radius of the shockwave is even less impressive than Rejection, leaving the 12 FP it demands from me feeling a little concerning, and at least Valorheart came with its own visual effect that kind of resembled a lion. This just looks like you took the Warcry effect and slapped it on a shield. Number 76, Bloodfiend's Bloodboon. I don't even think surprised is the right word here. I'm really just impressed this skill is as bad as it is. It's like watching your kid's comedy act bomb at the elementary school talent show and he retaliates by throwing the mic stand at someone in the front row. Like, you're just impressed he even thought of it. Thinking about how much work it took to literally forget the remembrance weapon of the boss you kicked the ass of just to get to the DLC in the goddamn first place. Like, just look at the bullet physics here. The AoE itself even tracks the enemy you're targeted on. This skill had everything it needed to succeed. It was practically handed the keys to City Hall. How did we even end up here? Why is there such a massive delay between the tracking bullet and when the AoE finally goes off? Why does this cost the same amount of FP as the actual Bloodboon ritual skill? And can this seriously not even go through the fucking floor? Number 75, Igon's Drake Hunt. It's through and through, but you just stubbed your toe on the kitchen table. We're just never gonna beat Rain of Arrows, are we? The peak for great bows have long passed, but the great bow itself can enhance Igon harpoons, which deal 20% more damage against dragons. You know, like the one you just killed to unlock the harpoons. I don't know, I just feel like the only person who even likes this skill enough to find it useful is some dude who lives by himself and belts out, "Curse you, Bale," at 2 in the morning every time he fires a shot. The motion values are only 155, which is very similar to something you already get on Mighty Shot and Through, and with a slightly upped FP cost. Igon's Great Bow is already of lesser performance when it comes to damage to make room for the anti-dragon effect on the harpoons, but even if I'm using his bow specifically as a dragon hunting tool, I'm still just gonna want Rain of Arrows over this due to the amount of ground it covers and its ability to rack up status. Number 74, Wall of Sparks. I can't definitively prove that you literally took the animation of the Charged R2 on the perfume bottle moveset and just slowed it down and made it into an ash, but that's what you did. That is what you did, 100%. I can also prove that it's not worth a second of anyone's time because all the useful properties of Wall of Sparks already exist on either the Charged R2 or the Rolling Sparks Ash. The Charged R2 gives you area coverage, Rolling Sparks gives you a slight delay between the perfume and the explosion. It feels uncomfortable. It certainly doesn't need more FP than Rolling Sparks, and the motion values on it are considerably worse than a Charged R2 anyways. I guess we have the Perfumer Talisman to take into account, and I'm sure it has some minor benefits on the right build, but whatever those benefits are probably don't save me from the embarrassment of looking like someone attached a fistful of bottle rockets to a water sprinkler. Number 73, Piercing Throw. Usable on throwing blades. So the Smith script dagger. And nothing else. And it comes with the damn thing fresh out of the box already. It cannot be used on any other weapon type, not even other Smith script weapons. I think this might be the least flexible weapon dash in the entire scope of the game, DLC included. No, I guess Wing Stance is there too. The only other contender would be Through and Through, but at least you can alter the affinities on throwing blades so you can benefit from different scalings, so that's 1 point for the fucking Piercing Throw, I guess. The bullet itself has a velocity of 58, which is pretty speedy, all things considered, even if the lack of range sort of overshadows it. But since its only competition is Scattershot, any positives this can bring to the table is going to have no choice but to contend with the benefits of Scattershot, and that shit's just never gonna happen. Number 72, Feeble Lord's Frenzied Flame. Maybe if jolly old Saint Prick himself put torch skills in all our stockings instead of coal, we'd finally shape up and get our shit together. My god, that spread is pathetic. Who is this even designed to hit? I think I need to ink out any phrase containing good against a dragon ballsack in future videos, because now it seems like FromSoft is starting to design skills that are specifically meant to only perform under those conditions. 3 FP per projectile is no small expense for a 360-degree spread that somehow makes the Midra's Frenzy Flame incantation looks like it could win an Olympic medal in archery. If it were any less accurate, it would just be a torch that automatically drained your FP by having it in your hand, because lighting the room around you would become the absolute ceiling of utility. Number 71 and 70, Rancor Slash, on both the sword and the glaive. I mean, the Rancor bullets can flinch standard enemies, which leads to a true combo with all 3 hits, but if that's something you don't care about, then I would stick Sword Dance on literally any cold or magic-infused weapon it's allowed to go on, and just consider this unique skill a pothole in the road and don't look back. It's one of the DLC's many vanilla skill, but with visuals this time, subgenre of unique weapon skills, a particularly frustrating set of abilities that have already overstayed their welcome about 7 entries ago. But I guess this sword just really needed to have skulls flying out its fucking mouth like an Iron Maiden album cover, so... Number 69, Shield Strike. This was only ever meant for dueling shields. It only performs well on dueling shields, and unless you're swapping out the shield bash on the fingerprint shield, a 4-hit combo on an overly decorated lunch tray just ain't gonna work. It does come with guard frames on certain shields, which is nice, but that's no different from any other shield type ash only because it's extremely difficult for a shield not to be a shield. It's a thick-ass steel wall you put in front of yourself to protect you. It's kind of hard to fuck it up. Shard of Alexander doesn't work, because of course it doesn't, why would it? The animation speed is noticeably slower when put on something that isn't a dueling shield, and its only benefit seems to be cosplay purposes for shield maiden builds for people who want to wave their shields around like giant aluminum bats. Number 68, Blinkbolt. This formula shouldn't be new to us by now. Stick the basic bitch version of a cool unique skill on an ash you can use on multiple different weapon types. Scattershot Throw and Ghostflame Call are good DLC examples, but there's also the 3 slam abilities, Vacuum Slice, Bloodblade, Rain of Arrows, Sacred Rings, and then other abilities like Hoarfrost Stomp and Shared Order that have absolutely no discrepancies between its unique skill and its ash version. Blinkbolt is probably the worst example because you wrote out 95% of why the unique skill on the 2 Death Knight weapons were so uncontestable, leaving us with nothing but a glorified dodge button with an inconveniently slow delay. You can attack straight out of it, making it a good chasing tool, which I guess gives some points in PvP, like that's an advantage you can't find on like 60 other things. Number 67, Painful Strike. Okay, so I actually just got really curious and tested this to see whether or not this whole decreases stamina regen business was just flavor text. So I decided to put this up against 3 random enemies of various attacking speeds and stamina. A Fire Knight, a Bloodfiend, and a Jellyfish. The Jellyfish, of course, exhibited almost no interesting results at all, since it already fights with the alacrity of a terminally ill basking shark. And on the Fire Knight, I also didn't notice anything. I think he had trouble finishing a combo like once, and I only noticed when I was watching the footage back, so whatever. The Bloodfiend was a bit interesting because I noticed his signature 4-hit bitch fit suddenly became a huge problem when afflicted with the debuff. So any enemy with a low maximum stamina who can chain combos together, this might have value against. Yeah, exactly. I can't think of one either. The Bloodfiend, I guess. There you go. Number 66, Mists of Eternal Sleep. I was already on the fence about most of the sleep items the DLC gave us, but this eternal shit ain't fooling nobody. You can't just give regular sleep a PhD and a couple salt rocks and call it a completely different status. If the target is resistant to sleep, the same stagger animation is gonna happen anyways, which almost always plays to the detriment of eternal sleep, since the items that inflict it are usually going to have considerably less buildup. Considerably with a capital C, mind you, because 42 buildup is just some pathetic ass shit. Fucking Benadryl could put me to sleep quicker. It's good for getting rid of rune bears and godskins, but if the whole point is the enemy not waking up after an attack, then I guess you can just leave them there instead of kicking them while they're down. Coward. Number 65, Sleep Evermore. Unless someone is literally on the ground taking a nap and the purple aura is visibly above their head, just don't even attempt landing this. Getting the extra damage on an enemy who is sleep staggered feels like threading an actual needle. As soon as those little purple rays gleaming above someone's head start to dissipate, the window has already passed, meaning it can only reliably be connected with enemies that are truly fully asleep, or can be fully put to sleep in the first place. But if they can be slept, you can just spread them apart and insert yourself as frequently as your stamina bar allows and they won't get back up. In layman's terms, who the fuck cares? Either wait for a buff that'll never come out or download Smithbox and just make it yourself, I guess. Number 64, the Madding Spearhand Strike. We got the Stare of Penance, and now the Handshake of Penance. If they ever change their mind and a second expansion comes out, I'm gonna put in my vote for the Madness Choke Slam. It's hard to identify the utility of a skill with a linchpin that can only be afflicted on other tarnished, and a large reason why the Frenzy Flame incantations are so multi-purpose is their fire damage on top of their status buildup. The Spearhand Strike gives you none of that, but it can give you over 300 Madness buildup in a single use, becoming a skeleton key ability that can just take care of pretty much any NPC enemy as long as their focus isn't some ridiculously high amount. And I don't think any other NPC in the game has a focus of over 300, so you should be pretty safe there. Number 63, Raging Beast. I usually don't complain about this. In fact, I'm more likely to encourage it, but this is just way too much movement for a single ability. The initial dodge always seems to cover way more ground than the jumping swipe, which often leads to underestimating the spacing half the time, and I feel like I'm constantly getting tripped up by the subsequent lack of distance on the follow-up heavy. I don't know, I feel like I have to space out 7 different player movements just to make sure the entire thing connects properly. You do get iframes on the dodge, which is nice, sometimes, but trying to land it if you're locked onto anything closer than dodging distance just turns your character into a bouncing logo screensaver. Number 62, Scattershot Throw. This Ashe has really similar hit physics to Flame Fall upon them, where a shit-a-majillion knives get thrown out at once, but any single enemy can only receive a maximum of 4 hits as a means of bottlenecking damage and status. All 4 hits still apply to effects like the Winged Sword Talismans, and they apply their own independent status, but this is now a repeated offense that I'm starting to have a bit of a problem with. The new weapon categories are nice, but each of them having only 2 or 3 entries means Ashes like this are next to pointless, and this particular Ashe has 1, which is the Smith Script Dagger. The entire point of both Piercing Throw and Scattershot is to be either placed on or swapped off of the Smith Script Dagger, and I'm not too sure how to feel about that since there's a claw weapon with its own Scattershot attached to it. Number 61, Revenge of the Night. Isn't that the name of that shitty Netflix comedy with the vampires and the fucking... Who cares? Who gives a shit? This isn't important. It's not bad. My opinion of it would be a bit more favorable if the Deflecting Hard Tier and Curve Sword Talisman didn't treat it like a distant stranger. 15 poise damage isn't that bad, I guess. And you can wring some good damage out of it if you're built for it. FP cost isn't some egregious amount. I don't know. Most of my complaints lie with the shield itself and not the Ashe that's tied to it. But not having this as its own Ash of War doesn't sound like I'm missing too much, since the 2 items that should have worked with it just decided not to because it's a projectile or something, and not a true guard counter that involves a sword and board. Or that's my guess anyways. What We Do in the Shadows, that's the show I was thinking of. Wasn't even close to the actual name, like embarrassingly far away. Number 60, Repeating Fire. I'm confident now. Rain of Arrows just can't be dethroned. It's just better at everything. Why waste 12 bolts and 26 FP and risk yourself getting fucker punched out of the animation when you can just stand behind something and fire a single arrow that magically transmogrifies into a bullet rain of whatever status you want? The repeated shots also receive a pretty heavy penalty to their overall efficiency since you're firing 12 at once, compared to the spread crossbow which fires 8 simultaneous arrows as a standard shot without locking it behind a special skill. So if you like wasting bolts and your FP, and you're okay with the consequence of being knocked out of the skill before the second shot, then I've got your orange squeeze right here, Grandma. Number 59, Ghostflame Call. Well, we get what we ask for. Now we have a Ghostflame ignition that scales off of both dexterity and intelligence, and I hate it. Please, take it all back. I'm sorry, I didn't know what I wanted. This approaches the problem of needing to spread your stats a little thinner to get maximum damage out of it instead of focusing it on one stat. Unless you've got perfect 99s across the board, the standard Ashe will almost always do less damage, which is fine. It's the Ashe version. I would have expected that. But this gap between the two options on their Frost buildup is extremely important. You can successfully freeze something with a single L2R2 from Ghostflame Ignition, but the weaker Frost buildup on the standard Ashe version makes that much harder to do. This leads to the Ashe itself losing out on over half of its damage with no change in FP expense. Number 58, Romina's Purification. It's fun. Wish it came with a little more hyper armor, or any at all, but the two slashes can dole out some pretty decent physical damage, but the status MVs could probably afford to be notched up a couple digits. I don't know how much would be considered a balanced amount, but I've never seen a single successful proc using the skill, and just knocking a few R1s into someone's face always seems to do the trick anyway, especially with the alternate halberd animations. TPFB seems to do both more status buildup and damage upon flicking the status, and having trouble keeping up with standard weapon ashes leaves the skill in a really awkward spot. Number 57, Deadly Poison Spray. You can easily get 100 plus buildup on standard R1s from the Deadly Poison bottle, so using the skill to proc poison on yourself just feels unnecessary. Is there seriously not a stray bird or something you can just sprinkle a little herpes salt on and activate your Kindred Talisman that way instead? It's not something you need to do. The poison cloud lingers around for a pretty long time, and anything that can't immediately evacuate the premises is probably going to pay for it, but it feels redundant on a weapon type that already comes with a pretty decent AoE built into its standard moveset. It roots you completely in place and doesn't allow for any animation cancel shenanigans, which just doesn't feel fun, ever. I guess enemies don't seem to give that much of a shit if their back is turned, so that's a nice utility Deadly Poison is finally able to get its hands on, but that's one minor advantage for a unique skill that never feels like it pulls as much weight as just revving up a charged R2 when watching brainlets walk into it. Number 56, Tremendous Phalanx. Moonrathil? What the fuck is a Moonrathil? Okay, this is a stupid ass name. I'm really sorry, but I just need to cut this off at the head. This needs to be addressed. So help me God, if noun from past game plus random celestial figure becomes a new naming formula, if FromSoft's next game has me talking to an NPC named Startorius, I'm gonna fucking punch something. I don't know who this Moonrathil bitch is, but I better never see her ass again. Anyways, it's just an arc of big blades that can't deal stance damage. Carian Phalanx still proves its kingliness in the damage department, and the regular old Glint Blade Phalanx Ash of War can still hit with 20 when all 4 of its blades connect. If we include the follow-up stab with that, this unique skill actually doesn't outpace the stance damage that much, especially if you put Glint Blade Phalanx on a Colossal Sword. Fucking Moonrathil. Get the fuck out of here. Number 55, Jori's Inquisition. No way this does bleed damage like the spear. Are you serious? Hold on. Holy shit, it does. I mean, I could get through an early 2000s infomercial before it procs, but the fact that it's even a mild accessory to the projectiles at all seems ridiculously sweet. That would also explain the fact that only a fraction of the arcs actually register as hits against an enemy, but it just results in the whole Ashe feeling very bottlenecked. I can almost imagine the exact interaction that took place when they tested damage, watched it shred everything, and then bumped up the hit duration to 0.5 seconds to balance it. I don't think that's a bad way of doing it, but when I saw how frequently these golden toenails spawned in, I was expecting that shit to feel like an M2 Browning when I took it into a fight. The damage is decent enough, but the large spacing in between hits creates an awkwardness I just don't think needs to be there. Number 54, Fan Shot. Alright, so I don't think anyone actually knows how the arrow physics on this skill works, and once I tell you how it works, you're gonna be surprised and probably a little mad and confused as to why people ever thought it was a decent skill. There are 2 separate attack IDs for this barrage of 8 arrows, meaning, at any point in time, anything you aim this at will actually only be hit by 2 arrows at a time, each with an attack MV of 140, totaling out to just below 3 times the damage of a normal longbow shot, which isn't bad, it's not exactly good, but the disappointment starts to set in when you realize this affects status buildup as well. Since only 2 shots are technically being fired, that also means twice the status buildup of a regular arrow, for 8 arrows. If you're waiting for the point of this skill, then get in line, because I've been here for a while now and I still ain't fucking seeing it. Number 53, Lightspeed Slash. So the light attacks literally mean light attacks, like with beams of light and stuff. Okay, just checking. It said I could do a light attack follow-up after landing, so you tell me what I'm supposed to think. How does the speed of light in this context compare to Fulgurous speed? I'm guessing the speed of light and lightning are roughly the same, scientifically speaking, but in Elden Ring, you're barely matching the speed of a sedan in a school zone. Each bullet has MVs of 35 or 38 when charged, meaning most of its power is going to come from the weapon scaling. This was a 1.13 change, as 1.12 had it to where each of the beams had a flat holy damage value of around 30 per bullet, and now it only has 8, but with the help of the new MVs. I still just really feel like it's missing something. Maybe it's just final boss item syndrome, where if it doesn't leave a nuke-sized crater that covers half the map, then I just hope it eventually gets the buff it needs, hey. The light beams have incredibly small hitboxes, which can lead to a lot of the rain miraculously dodging crowds of small enemies, even though you sprung it right in front of their face. Good as expected against bigger dudes, it's very average. Promise Consort is still better, and I think that's always going to be the case. Number 52, the Claws of Night Scattershot. The Scattershot skill on the Claws of Night being better than the basic Ash has mostly to do with the claws themselves. Magic and bleed buildup on a single weapon is a pretty flexible setup you don't see too often. It's capable of around 1 to 200 more damage than Scattershot Throw on a quality Smith script dagger, and the no FP animation throws out 6 knives instead of the 2 on the basic Ash, which I'm sure means something to somebody, I guess. Having something like this on a claw type weapon also means a more diverse build that's capable of both close and long-range punishment. It only trails the Bloodsmith script dagger by 9 base buildup, but the damage discrepancy is night and day. The projectiles also look cooler. Number 51, Hone Blade. 6% more damage for an exact asset copy of the butchering knife that's set up with Barbaric Roar as a default? Get this shit out of here, man. What is it with this game and heal on hit effects? What is the lore behind why FromSoft is so afraid to just make these good? Hone Blade rips ass, the Crimson Sapping Tear rips ass, the Godskin Cloth is barely decent. Like, what the fuck? They probably didn't even want to bring this skill back from DS3 because they didn't know how to make it exciting, but I guess they feared the consequences of disappointing the 7 Twitter accounts asking for it in the DLC slightly more. You know what would have been better? A new fucking Great Axe. Number 50, Overhead Stance. I like how it looks, how it feels, and I like signing fuckers up for front row seats to the triple Ichimonji special, but there's a lot about this Ash that just feels very lacking. Don't even try to make the light attack work, just don't, it's not worth it. The Stanced Heavy is the only move you need to worry about, and it's still not even really that good, at least when comparing it to other Ashes best used on katanas like Double Slash, Piercing Fang, Unsheath, you know, that thing katanas just fucking have as a default. It feels much better on a great katana, but I mean, well, that of course means the great katana, because we keep running into the same problem of there only being one of the weapon type the Ash can even attach to. Number 49, Aspect of the Crucible Wings. Jesus. Okay, competition's starting to get a little stiff. Honestly, you just shouldn't have even bothered with that twin blade attack. You can't even use it to proc status effects because they thought ahead of that and decided to tank the status MVs down to 40% per hit. The standard version, meanwhile, gives you an MV of 247, which is just slightly higher than other heavy hitter Ashes like Giant Hunt and Lion's Claw, with additional range and verticality to work with. If I could choose to rank this version by itself, it wouldn't be anywhere near the bottom half. But since the Ash isn't separated, I'm forced to play by the game's rules, even if that's to my detriment. The Twin Blades Ash watches cinema sins in its free time and wouldn't know proper damage or utility from its own shitty taste in entertainment. And we don't get to ignore it. It has to be ranked like everything else, so this is just where it's at, okay? I'm sorry. Number 48, Divine Beast Frost Stomp. It's very decent. It's pretty good. If you liked Hoarfrost Stomp, you'll like this one around the same amount, I guess. Is this paragraph sounding underwhelming yet? Well, that's how I felt getting what's functionally the same thing as Hoarfrost Stomp as a remembrance reward.
But you can charge it up with Godfrey Icon.
Shut up, nobody cares. I've given Godfrey Icon enough chances over the past couple months. I don't care if it got fixed in 1.14. I'm just done. I've just decided my playthroughs are much more fun if I don't give a shit. Besides, charging it for the status buildup seems to be the way to go anyway, since you get over twice the regular amount. Number 47, Devonia's Vortex. Longer windup, a little over the same damage as Ordovis Vortex ever since 1.14, and the same blast radius. Yeah, no, I'm good. Maybe make the Crucible Hammer Helm give a specifically large boost to this skill only. I feel like that'd be fitting enough. The helmet is similar enough to the weapon itself. It's not like Ordovis' helmet has a giant sword blade just morning wooding out the top of his head. It can work, it fits. Or maybe have the spinning of the hammer whirl up a gold-tinged wind current that keeps you relatively safe from enemies a la Divine Beast Tornado. Oh, okay, you give me your fucking ideas then, because this just isn't a good skill. Even the visuals of the blast wave are like hilariously disproportionate to the hammer. I mean, it's a particle effect. Shit, all you had to do was scale it up a bit. Okay, my bad. It's slightly stronger than Ordovis Vortex. The main MV clocks in at 200, and the one on the Greatsword is only 160, so wow, what a power gap. This bitch weighs 20 pounds. Number 46, Savage Lion's Claw. Sometimes I really loathe how this game solves its problems, and other times I just don't. Other times, like now, I just laugh. If you were one of the many who begrudgingly pointed out the punch-drunk uncle tracking on the Lion's Claw, FromSoft decided the best solution was to just add a follow-up attack and now shut the fuck up. Just shut the fuck up forever. And it worked. Whenever I don't hit with the first strike, the aerial spin and the second slam almost always makes the mark. But a lot was sacrificed for this to be made possible and still balanced. The first swing of the skill has considerably decreased power across the board, the attack MVs being 195 instead of 240, and the poise MV being less than half of a standard Lion's Claw for the same amount of FP. This means that unless you are fully intent on doing the follow-up, the standard Lion's Claw is just always going to be better. The only exception seems to be the status affinity weapons, since the status MVs are a square 100 for all 3 attacks. Number 45, Kowtower's Resentment. Sweet fucking Christ, what a stat glutton of a weapon. Strength, dex, intelligence, and faith. And impressively enough, the Gazing Finger somehow uses them all. The magic damage from standard attacks obviously benefits from intelligence, but the unique skill does holy damage and scales from both intelligence and faith. Charging it gives it an extra 100 holy damage, but it doesn't seem to be affected by Godfrey Icon, and Shard of Alexander only improves the full skill by around 5% instead of the usual 15% promised. It's yet another weapon with scaling that hoodwinks players into leveling the wrong shit by slapping a big ol' E on the faith scaling, even though the skill gets most of its punch when leveling both. In fact, when I tested it with both stats individually, it looks like faith just barely stretches ahead by a few points of damage, but not by anything significant, so not like it really matters. Number 44, Rancor Shot. It's one of the greatest as far as bow-related skills go, but this just does nothing but definitively prove that Rain of Arrows is and always was the ceiling. 1.13 came around and massively decreased the status buildup with arrows that inflict status effects, but aside from that, it seems to do around 90% of the damage of a regular shot, whereas Barrage only deals 80%. So if you're a Barrage enjoyer, have a good old get fucked and die from Mr. Miyazaki himself, I guess. The homing value is also 80, which is just enough to feel like every single arrow is magnetically attached to your rectum upon someone shooting it at you, but that's where the ridiculousness stops. It's not chasing shit around walls or anything. Number 43, Witching Hour Slash. You were able to give us this, but not the Virgil AoE on the Line of Stars katana. I really don't know what to think about this one. The attacks feel fun, and the wind-up time doesn't really take that long, but I can understand why people find it difficult to manage, especially since you're so prone to interruption. It's also the only sword I know of with magic damage that scales off of dexterity, and I just don't know how I feel about that shit at all. It can contribute quite a lot to bleed buildup, and I have a hunch that's one of the main intended uses, since the katana's moveset also borrows the R2 attack from the Serpent Bone Blade. Number 42, Horn Calling. If it were just a little more powerful and a little less expensive, this could be a reliable ranged attack for melee builds, but something about it just isn't quite there for me. I do think it's a nifty utility that it can travel over gaps and such. I wasn't expecting it to be able to counter Albinoric archers from another rooftop away, but I was trying to test the range for the Blindfold of Happiness, and when the effect expired, Horn Calling was the only thing immediately selectable. And to my pleasant surprise, it actually wasted her. You better not intend to do anything else of significance after the skill ends though, because apparently this move needs to consume the equivalent stamina of an entire P90X workout. Number 41, Darkness. At 80 faith, I'm hitting this Horned Warrior for 965 damage. After applying the debuff, the first standard R1 hits for 1159. As can be easily proven, multiplying 965 into 1.2 actually gets us 1158. Oh, okay, so yeah, it's 20%. Just making sure we all understand what 20% is. The appeal for the Darkness skill is for builds that use other sources of holy damage that isn't the Sword of Light. Obviously, if you have both, then that means you're new game plussing, and so a lot of your numbers might be slightly off by a certain amount. The debuff also increases holy damage negation, which is an important distinction to make. You can have 0 holy negation on something and still have it take 20% more holy damage. That just gets tallied as 1.2 in the parameters, which essentially means minus 20%. Number 40, Poison Spear Hand Strike. I think 40 is just a reasonable spot for this stinky handshake because poison, although enabled by an increasing list of other tools and spells and utilities, is still just poison. And poison, when competing with literally everything else, isn't great. Now, the handshake itself inflicts a buildup of 155 as a base, which, if you're not a numbers person, is pretty fucking nasty once you get some arcane scaling going. It's nastier than a brothel of chain smokers and a waste management facility. That's enough poison to give just about anyone a nice big whiff and the primal desire for a shower. Poison Spear Hand is unbelievably good at what it's intended to do. It's just that when it comes to slathering somebody with toxic mold, that's almost always going to be less effective and usually less exciting than forcing someone to deep throat a giant ancient sunflower. Number 39, a Deadly Dance. This underrated skill has its dick swirling around in so many different power pools that it's hard to pick my favorite. It's a dancing skill, so it gets boosted by the dancer set, but it's also a multi-hit skill that's really good at activating the winged sword talismans for the final follow-up kick, which is also specifically boosted by the Shattered Stone Talisman and Divine Bird Warrior Greaves, all in addition to the usual Shard of Alexander, of course. And a threatening stare from your boss is still enough to knock your ass out of it somehow. It's not the biggest complaint. The initial blade flurry at the beginning is still usually enough to proc a multi-hit effect, but that follow-up kick is where most of the damage comes from, and being a little harder to interrupt feels key in actually getting to it. Number 38, Light. Wow, holy fucking shit, this thing is fast. 1.14 really helped this out, and by really, I mean not a lot. The damage still sucks. When used separately, the effects of Light and Darkness are exactly the same, and it isn't until used together when they unlock an extra 3% increase to holy damage due to the two effects stacking multiplicatively. Bit of a damn shame the weapon itself does all the harm of knocking someone on the head with a hard bar of soap, in addition to looking like it. This had to have been one of the last weapons ever made for the DLC, because I can just feel the deadline crunch with this one.
Let's have it shoot beams of light fucking everywhere.
Wow, that's kind of ass.
Whatever, just give the player a holy buff after using it so they won't complain.
Number 37, Solitary Moon Slash. It's pretty good for the first unique skill most of us found. The follow-up swing also deals some of the most monstrous poise damage I think is possible for just a regular-ass greatsword. And the attack hitbox itself also starts when the sword is still far the fuck away behind you for some reason, which can lead to some potentially hilarious bullshittery against crowds of mobs, where someone behind and to the left of you just gets blasted off screen by nothing. The bullet on the first attack also has some pretty good verticality on it too, and it's no coincidence they give this sword to you in the one mausoleum guarded by a shitload of grave birds. Number 36, Moon and Fire Stance. I guess they were too afraid to give this one any extra juice since they also added in Rolana's cameo, or maybe someone just thought the game's history of stanced weapon skills was too unblemished and felt like throwing a turd in the bag, but 1.14 swooped in to somewhat redeem it. Not completely, but it does feel noticeably better than it used to. I will say that much. It is worth mentioning you can double up the R1s by slapping someone with both the magic arc and the sword, but the attack MVs on the magic arc are still only 50. Running this alongside Rolana's cameo also feels pretty decent now, due to the massive shortening of downtime before the talisman effect actually activates. The scalings are all equally split between the 4 upper stats, with 67s in strength and dex, and 61s in faith and intelligence. And I didn't die to this bitch 39 times for a goddamn quality affinity weapon. Number 35, Savage Claws. This one can be a little dangerous. While it is great at staggering standard enemies and even more threatening enemies like Fire Knights out of combos and such, the total poise damage for the full chain is only 22, and that's also provided your first couple swings don't whiff like they absolutely will. The status MVs for each attack are 60, resulting in a total of 360% of the claw's base status buildup if the full thing connects, so it's got a pretty obvious proficiency there, but it's just a little disorienting at point blank if you're locked on because the cameraman starts acting like he's filming a natural disaster documentary. But 13 FP is still relatively low for the status buildup that it hands out. So if you're looking for a reliable status ash that doesn't feel overtuned and you don't mind the Hurt Locker adjacent camera work, then this could be a winner. Number 34, Horn Calling Storm. I commented on the structure of this skill's damage in an earlier video, and I'm commenting on it again because I still think it's ridiculous. With each swing of the weapon, you can find a flat 35 holy damage attached in addition to its standard motion values. By themselves, they end up dealing around the same damage as a standard R1. This just ends up being another bizarre attack ID in the parameters because this single damage value is what throws off the skill's scaling completely. You got 45s in both dex and faith, yet point blank hits with the weapon skill benefits slightly greater from Faith, specifically because of that extra 35 damage. It's not a huge deal if you just care about the area control, but if you're into later New Game Plus cycles and need to start squeezing out damage where you can get it, I mean, that shit matters a lot. Number 33, Dryleaf Whirlwind. None of the motion values go that far above the power of a standard R1, which only ever tops out at 140 on the final attack. The status of each strike is only 70% of a normal attack as well, which seems like an unnecessary downtune to what it could have been. Honestly, I mean, Dryleaf Whirlwind is really good, perhaps even great. It can slap away great shields like empty pizza boxes, and it can stagger most standard enemies out of attacks, but all of its drawbacks and shortcomings versus Palm Blast are mere splinters, microscopic particles of dust compared to the one colossal failure of this Ashe, which is that it's intended to replace Palm Blast, an endeavor so unrealistically out of reach that it's flying first class over the Atlantic fucking Ocean. Number 32, the Spinning Guillotine, a true-to-type, all-purpose Fire Knight repellent, very possibly the only one of its kind. Remarkably low FP and stamina cost, a suffocating amount of stance damage if the initial slam and follow-up attacks all hit, and I promise they will, and additional frostbite buildup in case someone thought they were above a good flinch, all while additionally dropping a bit of lore that the character's spine is actually made entirely of glued-together pencil erasers. This skill has the most wrongfully hilarious animation I think this game has ever produced. It's right up there with the iconic Mesmergasm. I kinda wanted this skill to give me the boomerang attack the boss does. I certainly wasn't expecting to become the boomerang. I just hope Mesmer's military benefits come with decent health insurance, because this chronic back pain is gonna be felt 6 generations deep by the time I'm done stuffing this rune bear. Number 31, Weed Cutter. I didn't think this would even make such a big difference, but after testing it, that little extra speed on the Weed Cutter feels like it's doing so much more for the weapon. The speed of the animation itself didn't really change, but the recovery time in between attacks was definitely shortened. I don't know what to think about the weapon description cock-teasing a possible Scythe Ashe at some point, but the cat's already out of the bag on that one. We all know it ain't in the game, so why even say it? I also don't know why they used 6 separate attack IDs for this, because any set of 2 slashes will have the same MVs, knockback, poise damage, everything. The reason I think it feels as good as it does though is the stagger value being set to 2 instead of 1, which allows it to flinch a good variety of medium-sized enemies. Number 30, Rolling Sparks. This can still be insanely strong against a handful of larger enemies that are fat enough to eat the full chain, but that's the only obvious highlight in its utility. It can dish out the hurt, but it can double beautifully as a status supplier too. The status MVs of the explosions are 90 apiece, and the Ashe itself can score up to 6 consecutive hits. I think most of you got it from there. I also didn't know this before testing it for footage, but you can free aim it vertically as well, which I'm sure can help out against taller enemies like worm faces. It's not the greatest Ashe when it comes to the game's nimbler variety of foes, but it's very difficult to not land at least 2 hits on something with it, and I'm pretty sure this Ashe on the Frenzy bottle has ended friendships before. Number 29, Flame Skewer. This Ashe has a very understated benefit that I don't see a lot of people mentioning. Flame Skewer can be put on a hilariously long list of weapons. Anything capable of thrusting, at least the size of a straight sword, up to and including the Colossals. I scoured my inventory for a good 5 minutes looking for the shortest sword the Ashe would accept, and the goofiest shit I could find ended up being the standard rapier. Unexpectedly enough, this might be one of the best weapons for it, since the fire buff you get afterwards is a flat 95, meaning it'll get the most mileage out of weapons that hit fast and frequently. Twin blades and light greatswords seem to be the 2 best contenders for this. Number 28, the Golden Crux. Man, this thing just shits hyper armor. It's the only unique skill or even general ability I can think of with an obvious PvP application that still gives you something to work with in PvE that's just as good. This is the kind of care and attention incantations like Inescapable Frenzy really needed. It's one of my favorite unique skills to come out of the DLC, but it's also a testament to the idea that you can very easily design something to be friendly towards both types of players. The follow-up attack may not fuck all the time. It certainly fucks enough, a realistic amount, I would say. One thing I wasn't prepared for was the shrapnel-covered no man's land of discussions people were having about this skill in PvP. Specifically, the interactions people were having with high-latency users. And my hands are just way too full to get involved in any of that shit, so I'm staying over here in data mine land where everything actually makes sense. Number 27, Onza's Line of Stars. Man, are we ever gonna get tired of finding new ways for katanas to look badass? You'd think we'd have moved on to something else by now. You've got a total count of 6 hits on the full attack chain, each of which deal bleed status equal to the weapon itself, which can lead you into some pretty unexpected but decent status builds. The high stagger values of each hit ensure most enemies are able to take the full combo. Heavy bitches like Omens and Banished Knights can get sliced up by it pretty easily for this reason. I personally feel like the last hit in the sequence should have been a knockdown instead of just another heavy flinch. Not like anyone would have really given a shit, but it's the little things that count sometimes. Number 26, Blinkbolt Twin Axe. The ceiling on this one makes working with this unique skill a little tedious. On small to medium-sized enemies, the forward momentum on the spin is liable to push you well past your target before the spin actually ends. Even enemies as large as Divine Warriors can have trouble eating the entire spin, which is obviously what you should be aiming to do. This wouldn't really be such an issue for me if it weren't that the highest damage attacks are actually on the second half of the spin. Not to say the surrounding advantages don't still count, it can still proc multi-hit talismans even if a hit or two doesn't connect, and it seems like aiming the direction of the spin without locking onto something gives you a bit more directional control over where you end up, which can be enough to solve most of its problems. Number 25, Flare O Serpent. Alright, it's time to stop ignoring it. It is time to stop ignoring this one right now. I don't care if it's on a flail, it's time to start using it. This could be the most practical, unique skill a flail has ever received, and I'm saying that about a weapon class with a default Ash that still procs bleed with 0 FP. It's a weapon buff, it's an AoE, and it's fire, all in one L2. The explosion that comes with ground hitting attacks has 75 base fire damage that can be scaled with Faith, in addition to the flat 90 fire damage you receive from the weapon buff. Power Stance L1s trigger the explosion too, so you can pair this up with a Flameart Affinity Chain Link or something and start doing some real work with it. It's probably the most convenient buff I've ever seen on any weapon. I can't think of another buff effect off the top of my head that needs less than 8 FP. Number 24, Dynastic Sickleplay. Aside from sounding like an auto-generated Yu-Gi-Oh card title, this skill, and additionally the weapon it's attached to, is aesthetically one of my favorites, and the tunings give it to it by 1.14 make it feel even slicker. Looking at the motion values, I can guess this is used very similarly to Dynas's Finesse on the Bloody Healus, where the first follow-up does the most damage, but multiple follow-ups are especially good at building status. You can also dodge to the side using the L2, which puts it a hair above Dynas's Finesse, in my opinion, due to its directional flexibility. It's decent at keeping standard enemies staggered to receive the full attack chain, and the stamina required to actually perform the full attack chain is no longer enough to put my character into cardiac arrest. Number 23, Spinning Gravity Thrust. An undersold benefit of this Ash is its status potential, since both attacks together have 9 separate hits and a total status MV of 585 if they all properly connect. This can get pretty hilarious on great swords like the Flamberge. I was able to bleed pretty much anything I wanted every second use of the Ash, and I imagine this dramatically reduces the will to live for the average dragon as well. The amount of hyper armor this has could sink an aircraft carrier. In fact, it's been obscured throughout history that when they found the ruins of the Titanic, they only ruled the cause of the tragedy as a giant iceberg because the clear imprint of someone's corkscrewing body through the hull of the ship would have been significantly harder to explain. Not even a falling star beast could knock me out of this. I gave him as many chances as I could to, and he just didn't have it in him. Number 22, the Poison Flower blooms twice. Alright, status builders need to listen up because I'm gonna explain to you why this Ash being so high up is actually not a mistake. Putting this Ash on the Ant Spur Rapier allows you to access one of my favorite new techniques people don't know about yet. The Poison Affinity Ant Spur deals both poison and rot, but it deals poison at a significantly faster rate with High Arcane, meaning the usual R1 combo will proc poison way before it ever procs Scarlet Rot. The key is that the Ash itself also inflicts a heavy amount of rot. Proc poison and then detonate the poison damage with a very high chance of proccing Scarlet Rot with the Ash, allowing you to chain together the 2 detonations for a total of like 9,000 fucking damage or something ridiculous. Number 21, Smithing Art Spears. The motion values on this skill are a bunch of misleading Marys. This could be one of the highest damage unique skills in the entirety of the game, but if you were going by the motion values alone, you'd have registered this entire skill as white noise. You would have scrolled right past that shit with no reaction like half the videos on your recommended page, completely unaware that you just dismissed one of the greatest 7-ton spanking machines ever to have been dislodged from Miyazaki's belly button. With a maxed out Shadow Tree level, you can get around 7,000 damage from a single use. The spears even do pierce damage as an added bonus, which isn't a level of detail I was expecting. The super secret third hit from the spears probably just shouldn't be there. Feels like a post-credits Marvel movie scene. It feels strange, there's no stagger value attached to it, nor is there any visual indication indication that the spears are even capable of a second hit to begin with, but free damage is free damage, which means there's absolutely no problem here and I've found no bugs whatsoever, and anyone who works at FromSoft can go ahead and click off the video now, please, thanks. Number 20, the Needle Piercer. So is it a funny joke if I say this resets Frostbite? This skill has a unique double-edged utility that I think if you're running certain builds might play more to your detriment than people realize. The obvious hindrance most people run into here is removing status effects you've procced on enemies if they buff themselves with something you don't want them to have. But the effect also overwrites some of the most powerful debuffs in the game like Grail's Roar, Flower Dragon Bolt, and the debuffs from the 2 full moon spells. Shard of Alexander only seems to boost the initial sword swing and not the needles that follow it. The needles also don't have added damage to them outside of their attack MVs, which I thought was important to mention since I just assumed the projectiles only inflicted holy damage, which is apparently not the case. Number 19, Blind Spot. It's good. Really good, in fact. But it ain't Bloodhound Step. I don't think anything's gonna knock that shit off its throne. Granted, the dodge animation does have iframes, just not as many as people think. It only has 5. This is, of course, a mere drop of urine in the public pool of enormous advantages it has. It bypasses shields completely, and it has an attack MV of 145. That's just all about the info there is to share on it. It's fast, it covers ground, and it shits on shields. It doesn't need a lot of decoration to be good. Number 18, Promised Consort. I could probably pad the video with 5 minutes of explaining to you all the MVs and damage numbers and how they work in the skill and whatnot, but I'm not like those other YouTubers that just want your money. I'm lazy. I'm just fucking lazy. Here's the attack ID. Download Smithbox and figure it out. You don't need a computer scientist to tell you this skill hits harder than your security guard's stepdad, but you probably do need to be alerted that the holy beams do scale with intelligence. I haven't the faintest fucking clue why, but from what I've looked at, everything looks normal the way it's set up, so I don't know how this is possible. It's insane both in its performance and its mechanics. I don't know how it works. I don't even think FromSoft knows how it works. I just know that if you level intelligence with this weapon in your hand, everything about the game suddenly gets a whole lot easier. Number 17, Mesmer's Assault. God, I ignored this for so long. I'm so used to these flashy cinematic skills being moldy weekend trash in practice, so I've gotten to where they just don't even register on my radar anymore. And then shit like this and Promised Consort knock the door down and start throwing a fucking party in my living room. What is even happening here? How can a person just fly around like this? I don't know the science behind it, but by the time I finish its final animation, whatever I'm trying to kill is usually dead, so it's by no means mediocre. The Winged Serpent Helm can boost the damage by 10%. The moveset is almost exactly a copy-paste of what Mesmer does, and I can't believe I'm actually bringing that up as a good thing. If this skill were any more true to form to his animations, a snake would probably start choking out my character. Number 16, Swift Slash. I mean, it's still good. You can't really throw out R1 combos immediately after anymore like you're practicing for your next Tekken Invitational, but it's still good. The distance nerf makes it a little uncomfortable, but only because some of us have conditioned ourselves to use this dash as a self-catapult. Sometimes it's hard to tell with ashes like this one because they could nerf the sound effect volume or some shit and you'd still have a few players act like they gave it butter knife damage. This is also extremely fun to have on the Cirque Blades because of all its nifty throwing attacks. You can proc a dodge from a faster enemy to line them up for a Swift Slash, and I had the sentence "line them up for a Swifty" written, but I backpedaled on it because I felt like it would make a lot of people upset. Number 15, Euporia Vortex. The Vortex itself has 2 levels, and both of them can be activated simultaneously with one good full twin blade combo as long as all the hits connect on something. And now I'm gonna explain to you why that's not what you should do, because being greedy sucks and it usually gets you killed. Once you proc the skill boost, it takes a little over 30 seconds for it to expire, which is a lot longer than I was expecting. So don't feel pressured to sustain a constant R1 chain that's likely to get your ass blasted, because you can hold on to that shit for quite a long time. The first power boost contains a barrage of 8 bullets, while the second boost fires out a much longer distance barrage of 26. And the second power level was apparently so powerful that in the attack parameters, the base damage of each hit actually was brought down below the first, just because there were so many bullets being fired at once. You can still get around 9,000 to 10,000 damage on a fully charged Vortex if you're hitting something with the blade as well. Shit's good. Needs a little bit of setup, but it's damn good. Number 14, Shriek of Sorrow. On paper, taking RTSR and slapping it on an Ash no one asked for sounds like a horrendous idea, mostly because it is. But Shriek of Sorrow comes with some extra hidden artillery that makes it worth considering. There are 4 separate levels of power the effect goes through on very specific HP thresholds, going from 10 to 25%. How those effects are applied actually need a bit more explanation. So if you're at full HP and you activate the effect, you're still going to do 10% more damage even if your health goes below one of the other thresholds. The only exception seems to be the final threshold that goes below 30% HP, at which point an extra visual effect activates, signaling that Sicko mode has indeed been activated. This seems to be the only threshold that can be dynamically turned on and off as your HP fluctuates. This is actually good news, because this means you can activate the effect when you're just barely less than half HP to get the third threshold effect, and then heal yourself to full while still reaping the benefits of the 20% boost. Number 13, Red Bear Hunt. It bleeds, it seethes, and it succeeds in missing its first attack 90% of the time. But at the low price of moving forward and being spatially aware, this obstacle becomes a thing of the past. These are claw weapons after all. Just assume by default you won't be covering a lot of ground and this magically stops being a problem. Not a lot of complaints with this one, except for the fact that the lingering hitbox doesn't inflict bleed like the claws themselves do. Can't really think of a reason why they should. I think that'd be an awful experience for all involved, but it wouldn't be the first time we've seen them downturn the status MVs for a lingering hitbox or two. I'm just surprised is all. I'm not asking for more bleed or anything. I'm making a note about it. Just calm the fuck down. Number 12, Flame Spear. Flame Art Colossal Swords seem to be the best match for this Ashe, since you get the most poise damage and power out of its point-blank attack hitbox. Looking at each animation separately, using this with a Colossal Sword doesn't seem to affect animation speed like it usually would. This all points the player right to the Fire Knight's Greatsword as the objective best weapon to put this Ashe on. The flame buff also lasts for 40 seconds, meaning its 19 FP use can be completely eliminated with the Blue Dew Talisman. Oh, and this isn't a huge gripe. I actually think it's kind of funny when it happens, and I'm absolutely not saying the hyper armor is a problem. It is most certainly not, but I have noticed whenever you poise through an attack, the angle of your weapon will adjust slightly, and since the spear fires at the very tip of the weapon, this can drastically affect the trajectory of the entire bullet. You could get shoulder shoved by a corpse and the whole thing would just sail off into the mountains like it was planning a snowshoeing excursion. Number 11, Dragonwound Slash. I really just like how consistent it is. The 20% damage boost against both types of dragons makes it the perfect anti-Drake repellent no matter what New Game Plus cycle you're in. The hyper armor can muscle through most standard dragon attacks, fittingly enough, since that's the prey I'm hunting with a build like this to begin with, but this skill and its hyper armor being so tuned against dragons also adds the incredibly strong benefit of being able to just trade with anything you want. And since both the bullet and the weapon itself have their own attack IDs, you should absolutely be doing that. Now, if we could just fix the frighteningly long sheath poking its dick through the ground, we'd be in the presence of a real man's weapon. Number 10, Unending Dance. This is the kind of attack you'd see on a status weapon that's meant to build up a bajillion bleed in 5 seconds. I'm not going to bother listing out all the NVs for this one because it seems to be just a repeated variation of roughly 3 or so of the same attacks. The only ones I want to focus on are these two IDs here because I think these two attacks are specifically what make the skill so powerful. Having a stagger value of 2 in an attack chain literally designed to never end means as long as you have even a little something in the stamina tank, you can single out one enemy and just fucking vaporize them. The damage is very nice when held over time, but the stagger potential is what allows the skill to be held down for so long with minimal risk, even if the dancing animation itself reflects a common mating ritual seen in the late night clubs after 15 shots. Good with Blue Dew in the Viridian tier. Number 9, the Shadow Sunflower Headbutt. We can flatten fuckers with a plant elbow, flatten dudes with the power of plant ass, and now we can do it with plant head. We're slowly unlocking the Exodia of Erdtree avatars. This whole attack is just unreasonably strong. There are so many layers to its ridiculousness that I can't possibly fit it all into one paragraph. It's a fucking flower, first and most apparent. The unique skill whips out 65 total poise damage with enough hyper armor to survive a plane crash. Enemies not directly under the flower's oppressive wrath can still be knocked back by a second larger attack radius with no expense to damage, and 32 is a bit on the expensive side, FP wise, but this is post-game content we're knee deep into, so it's not like anyone really cares or it even really matters. If anything, the hyper armor might be a little too good. You can have half your health bar chewed up by something you thought was a glancing blow, and then look up and suddenly be racing for a heal you didn't even know you needed. Number 8, the Discus Hurl. Only needing 3 FP is pretty much handing you an automatic W. You have to do a whole lot wrong to fuck that up, and it does nothing of the sort. Most enemies who dodge it will dodge on the initial toss-up and not the actual tracking of the shield. It's got synergy with a whole buffet of different talismans and effects. The spam ability is currently eyeing the Geneva Convention like it's a fresh piece of unused toilet paper, and the incredibly low cost adds it to the mile-long list of benefits that come with building around the Blue Dew talisman. The stagger values are kinda interesting because how this flinches enemies depends on whether or not they're another player. In PvE, both the initial toss-up and the bullet itself itself can flinch small enemies, but only the bullet can stagger other player enemies, with a value of 3 instead of 2. It's easy, it's fun, it's way more powerful than it probably needs to be. I honestly can't think of a single thing wrong with it. Number 7, Flower Dragonbolt. Nothing much I say about this one I haven't already said in previous videos. The utility given to this weapon skill is one of the greatest assets to builds that use debatably the greatest element. It takes some of the most dominant lightning incantations and pushes them even further beyond their original fuck with ability. It's a unique debuff with its own category attached to it, so it can stack with any other debuff you have in your build up to and including Grail's Roar. Not like the damage on the lightning bolt itself isn't already forceful enough. If it doesn't taser fuckers with the initial damage, it'll make sure you're lined up for a KLS combo that potentially hovers just below 5-digit damage numbers, even in the base game. Currently, it's bugged to where the debuff seems to lower the damage negation by its PvP value, which is around 17%, and against some enemies like the Albinaurics, their lightning damage negation even seems to increase when afflicted with the debuff. So you might need to wait for another patch or two for the kinks to get ironed out, but when it returns, you'll know. Number 6, the Blinkbolt Long-hafted Axe. The default poise damage of Great Axe is a 5.5, which means the 400 poise MV on this unique skill only calculates to 22 poise damage on the downward swing. Thankfully, the heaviest lightning bolt to have ever been squeezed out of Thor's anus is there to save the day with a flat 10 extra poise damage. The whole thing gets boosted by the Death Knight armor set by a little over 8%, which is such an inconsequentially small boost that whether or not they stack multiplicatively doesn't even matter, because 8.2% gets rounded down anyways. Alas, 8% is still 8%, and that gets multiplied on top of everything else, so if you're knee-deep in the rectum of the DLC and your Shadow Tree level is close to max, that 8% is gonna pull much more weight. Number 5, Palm Blast. Where Bruce Lee took inspiration from fighters like the Great Gamma, Dryleaf Dane must have studied under Cinder Block from the Teen Titans, because ain't nobody moving your ass out of this ash. Slapping fuckers silly with 36 poise damage straight from your bare ass hands, and an attack MV of 460 just to really make sure the fist is felt on a nuclear level. What's especially hilarious to me is that the item description defines the uncharged attack as already formidable power. Even the guy writing the descriptions got to this ash and was like, bitch, you thought you were playing with fire before? Hold down that L2 button to unlock the fucking battle pass. Number 4, White Light Charge. Of all the weapon skills and ashes I've gone through like an old shopping list, the Ancient Meteoric Ore Greatsword really is the pinnacle example of what is referred to by the cool kids as a L2 stick. It's as straightforward as it possibly could be. It allows Colossal Sword builds to completely ignore their lack of mobility. It's a thrust, it's an AoE, and it deals a grand total of 36 poise damage provided both hits connect. Never has a regular moveset felt so pointless on a weapon before, and this is a Colossal Sword we're talking about, with the Zweihander moveset no less. You're throwing around some chunky R2s with this thing, slapping with some real meat. It takes a lot to invalidate the standard moveset of a weapon this massive, but the White Light Charge absolutely succeeds. Number 3, the Wing Stance. A lot of what makes this ash so powerful lies in the extremely short recovery time tied to the Stanced R1. The Stanced R1 attack combo returns to the stance far quicker than the R2 attack, allowing it to lead very comfortably into the weapon's heavy light attack combo, or even the Stanced R2 itself. And that heavy thrust attack just about carries the whole goddamn ash. I mean, fucking zoinks. That is 30 poise damage with a longsword. Square off couldn't reach heights this prominent. 251 for an attack MV is some of the most nutter butter ass shit to have ever crawled out of the DLC. The Stanced R1 is still great for status buildup since a full combo measures up to 240% of a regular R1, but that heavy thrust feels like an aviation engineer installed a jet engine into the hilt of the weapon. Number 2, Revenger's Blade. Okay, Miyazaki has to be a Devil May Cry fan. There's no disputing it now. White Light Charge gave us the stinger. We've already been drip-fed 17 different iterations of Virgil's Judgment Cut, and now we have the Jet Stream attack from Agni and Rudra. I'm pretty sure someone could make a half-decent DMC combo mod without even needing to retarget animations at this point. Like, fuck, the game just gives you everything you need. I would complain about not even getting this weapon and subsequently the skill until the very end of the DLC, but where else would you even put it? I can hand out 5,000 plus damage to an enemy in the base game without any Shadow Tree help at all and still end up stance breaking most standard enemies with it. Not a single attack on this skill has a stagger value of less than 2. It was literally designed to true combo into itself. Oh, and yet another skill the Godfrey icon actually works decently with, but it only seems to boost the initial charge. Not that I'm complaining, it's still a shit fuckload of damage, but credit due is credit due. Number 1, Kyrian Sovereignty. It's stupid. It's just fucking stupid. I was fully expecting things to get pretty ridiculous before testing this Ashe, and I still got hit with so many different things I just wasn't ready to see. The full charged combo clocks in at 93 poise damage and 844 magic damage as a base. The poise damage is very important here since you can very likely stance break something with the first swing anyways, leading to even more extra damage on the follow-up. An optimal build with all the appropriate talismans should have no problem hitting 8k on anything in the base game, even more so against enemies weak to magic like the gargoyles. It has a frighteningly long list of weapons it's compatible with, including daggers, twin blades, and CGSs, but the hyper armor you get seems to be linked to the type of weapon you throw it on. Great swords, heavy thrusting swords, and CGSs seem to lead the pack in this regard. Man, fuck vigor checking in PvP. You can start vigor checking the game's own bosses right now. You're one lead and hard tier away from inviting Miyazaki himself to your apartment so he can shake your hand and order you a fucking pizza.
That's all you've got.